All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Sankofa Video Book. Hi. Welcome to Sankofa Video Books and Cafe. I'm Christina Joy, the events coordinator, and we are here at 2714 Georgia Avenue Northwest, directly across from the illustrious Howard University, HU. You know. I know that's right. I didn't know how to say that. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our guest of the night, Miss Sheila Brown. Thank you, Miss Sheila, for coming and convening with us, sharing your work with us.
Thank you. I'm so honored to be here. Shall I say
Yes.
Yes. I am so honored to be here. This is just like a dream come true. I have been in DC all these years, and I have never imagined that one day I could have a book on your shelves and be talking with Sankofa, the conduit for history and culture. Like, this is just surreal for me. I'm so honored.
Wow. First of all, thank you.
Thank you.
To be a part of the Sankofa legacy is a humbling experience.
Yeah.
And so the fact, and to be around somebody who appreciates that legacy is also humbling.
Yeah. Well, I have history because, believe it or not, when Baba Haile Sharima first put out Sankofa, the movie, I was in high school at Montgomery Blair, and somehow one of the students or the teachers got him to come and talk to us about the film, and he literally escorted my group to the movie theater in Bethesda, and we saw it with him. Now,
Wow.
Isn't that incredible? So we were like one of the first groups to see the premiere, and we had him, and then he came back to the school with us, and we discussed the movie like in depth. And we had like a heated argument too, because there was a guy who was like our coordinator. He was really upset about one of the scenes in the movie, and I was like, "Well, it was reality, and that's what we need to focus on." No, I was mouth, and I'm like, "No, we're gonna represent Sankofa." So it really is 360 full circle for me coming back. And I also used to have a bookstore right up the street on Georgia Avenue called All Eyes on Egypt, but that was a life ago. So I have history with this place. Yeah.
Wow. Man, I just man, first of all, I'm I guess a Black business history buff.
Yeah.
And I have heard about your bookstore before. I've heard about a lot of the bookstores that have been.
Oh yeah. We used to call Georgia Avenue the Egypt, what we call it, Egypt on the Nile, right? We would call this.
That's what it was. That's what it was.
Yeah, this was the Nile River Valley. And we actually had an association, a business association called the Nile Valley River Business Association, I think it was called. It was back in 2002, 2003.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a sister, she had a bookstore across the street from mine, and brother Rafu. It was like 5 bookstores right there, we were all across the street, and we peacefully coincided.
Yeah, because Children of the Sun was on the next block.
Children of the Sun was right next to me at first, and he moved across the street, and then we had the Pyramid Bookstore right next to me. And another story about the Pyramid Bookstore was I was like 13 years old, and my teacher in junior high school, he saw some potential in me. He saw a fire in me for our history and culture, and he gave me my first African-centered book. You know what that was? Brother Tony Browder's From the Browder File.
Wow.
And I was lit. My life never was the same after reading that book. And then he had the nerve to send me to the Maryland Leadership Academy. Yeah. So I was over there, and I was like, first of all, we were the ones in ancient Egypt. They're like, oh girl, you don't know what you're talking about. I was like, oh no, that's read Browder File. So I was already on a journey. And then the final story is, I did something really, really good, and I earned like $300. And I had never been to Georgia Avenue before, and my mom brought me to the Pyramid Bookstore, and I like literally lost my mind. I could not believe that Black folk had done all of this, like beautifys, like the books. It was just incredible. And it was like different sisters and brothers in there with different stores. And then I never imagined that just 10 years later, I would be right next door to Pyramid with all eyes on Egypt.
Wow. Wow.
Isn't that crazy?
Wow.
And now I'm here.
Yes.
As an author.
Wow. That's
Like, it's really interesting, right?
Seriously, like.
It comes full circle. I'm telling you, it's incredible. So I feel so full.
Yes.
You know, I was telling this sister earlier, I was like, this book is so special that if I had to leave the planet right now, I would be like, I'm at peace. Because I left something so precious that if people would just open their heart and open their mind and read it, they will see what I'm talking about. Like I fulfilled my divine purpose, at least one of them, majorly. The other one back there is my son. And shout out to Baba Yao, the king who has decided to take up the mantle and help me get the word out about my book. He's my book promoter. He is an incredible, amazing elder in the community, and just anyone who has helped me try to get the word out of this book. Thank you so much, because we're here in Sankofa, and we're getting the word out. And I know things are about to change for me with this book now.
First of all, can I say, you're branding? Like, look at all that. Like, you didn't create a book, you made a whole world. Like, this is amazing. Can you please, like, so let's dive into the book.
Yeah.
It says it all in the title. The Divine SelfQare Strategy, a wellness guide to total body alignment.
Yes.
Like, that is a heavy claim. Like, and I see, like, this, you have content. This is not, no, this is the meat and potatoes right here. Like, you put your heart and soul into this. How long is it going to take you to?
Well, interestingly enough, and I talk about that in the book, it took me about 9 months to actually get the first draft completed. But it was about 3 months of even convincing myself that I needed to write it in the first place. As a Nawapian at the time, right, as someone where we dealt with, we used to have this saying that it actually is a year in order for a person to be born into the world. We would teach that it took 9 months in the womb, but you were actually conceived in the spirit 3 months before. And that was just a Nawapian thing. But it made sense for me because it felt like I was giving birth to something powerful. And in fact, some of my sister friends, Mama I and Mama Jennifer and some other sisters came over to my house. I was like, y'all, I just gave birth. And y'all gonna come celebrate with me. And they did, and we had a great time. And that was even like before the book actually printed. So it's been a long journey. It took a year, and then there was another 6 months with editing and getting formatted and learning the ropes. What it's like to be a self-published author. It's very difficult if you don't have like the kind of guidance that I wish I had had on all the painful lessons and expensive lessons that you should learn, like different formattings for different publishers and, all these little nuances that can get really costly. So it's been a journey. But yes, the Divine SelfQare Strategy, a wellness guide, is a loaded title, and it's a little deceptive because it doesn't do justice in really conveying just how ancestral and ancient the wisdom in this book is. And how, for example, there's a chapter in here called The Voices of the Ancestors. And you would say to yourself, what in the world does Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Harriet Tubman, Harriet Jacobs, Booker T. Washington, Marcus Garvey, Nathaniel Turner, and Gus Smith, and Sally Brown have to do with self-care, womb wellness, anything to do with health? Well, that is where we can get into an amazing conversation that I think will be so informative and so enlightening, because there is an important link between what these ancestors had to tell us about two very important things that are the central theme of this book, and that is freedom and health. And if these last 3 years haven't taught us anything, is that there is an inseparable connection between freedom and health. Our ancestors were clear about that. We are becoming clear about that now, and we weren't before. And the two cannot be separated. And if we separate them, what ends up happening is a series of events that will take us from feeling like the natural, beautiful women that we are, into altering ourselves and exposing ourselves to dangerous procedures, chemicals, and supplements and elements that alter our connection to nature, the divine, in what I call, or what I should say, Dr. Martin Luther King called, the powerful science of trans physics. When I tell you, family, we don't know that King like we think we know that King. Dr. King left us a jewel so powerful and so important that it came to me after I wrote chapter 3, and it was the most timeliest thing, because what happened was I got a download from the Most High, and I asked the question, Creator, Most High, Divine One, the protector, the provider of the universe and everything in it, how are you comfortable with your people being so vulnerable and so broken and so at risk in a world that you purport to own and mold and create and protect? Like, how is it? And I was like really struggling with this question, because we had George Floyd, we had Sister Brianna, and it was all kinds of indices left and right that we were not going to make it if we keep at the rate that we're going. And I asked a very sincere question, and I really wanted an answer. And believe it or not, the answer that I got was, you have everything you need to defeat your enemy. And I was like, the only thing you ever seem to have ever given us is air, fire, earth, and water. And I was saying it facetiously, right? I was putting everything on the line, like I was just mad. And the response that I got to that question, or that hit back, was exactly. Start with Frederick Douglass. And I rested on it. I didn't do anything with it. And I just, I'm marinating on that because I believed it. But there's another aspect of me that always is at conflict with my spiritual acceptance of truth. And that is my need analytically to be able to prove things, partly because I'm an attorney. And I like to not just make claims, but to be able to prove them. Although when it comes to spirituality, I personally don't need it. But if I was getting a download that said we had everything we needed to defeat our enemies, that our ancestors already knew this, and that I was going to be tasked with the assignment of proving it. So I said, okay, I'm going to rest on that. And then one day during meditation, Frederick Douglass came back up again. It is not the light we need, but the fire. It is not the gentle shower, but the thunder. We need the storm, the whirlwind, and the earthquake. And I said, oh my God, that is cute. I can hear 4 elements there. We need, it's not the gentle shower, right? That's water. But it's not the light we need, but the fire. So that's the fire element, literally, right? It's not the gentle shower, but the thunder. So that's literally water and air. And it's not we need the storm, the whirlwind, which is the air again, and the earthquake. There was 4 elements right there. And I was like, ooh, okay, this is cute. Well then, in that speech, which came from What to the Slave is the 4th of July. Y'all remember studying that in school a little bit? What to the Slave is the 4th of July? Well, here's the context behind that if you don't know, family. In 1852, the Honorable Frederick Douglass was invited by the Ladies Anti-Slavery Society to come and, of all things, celebrate with them their freedom from slavery, their freedom from the British. Right? They asked a man who had literally been enslaved and fought his way tooth and nail out of slavery. Now, bear with me, because we remember the theme, freedom and health, 4 elements, right? You have everything you need to defeat your enemy. So I said, okay, I hear that beautiful statement. I had heard, I'll be completely honest, I hadn't really heard that statement before. I was listening to a lecture by Dr. Umar Johnson. And he would say that at the end of his lecture, right? And I was like, okay, so it was kind of in my subconscious. But then I went to that speech and I saw that there was another segment where the elements were raised. And if you don't mind, let me just go there in chapter 3, because it's a little bit more engaged than my beloved memory would like to entrust me with. But it was so powerful. that he did this.
Oh my God.
It's talking about the destructive power of water. And he says, great streams, now this is the same speech.
Yeah.
Great streams are not easily turned from channels worn deep in the courses of ages. They may sometimes rise in quiet, stately majesty and inundate the land, refreshing and refertilizing the earth with their mysterious properties. They may also rise in wrath and fury and bear away on their angry waves the accumulated wealth of years of toil and hardship. They, however, gradually flow back to the same old channel and flow on as serenely as ever. But while the river may not be turned aside, it may dry up and leave nothing behind but the withered branch and the unsightly rock to howl in the abyss sweeping wind, the sad tale of departed glory. And then this is the last thing he said. And when I tell you, when he said this statement, he sent chills down the audience's spine. He said, as with rivers, so with nations. How dare you, Negro? We invite you here to talk about our freedom, our celebration of joy, independence from the British. We are not slaves. And you come here talking about we need the fire, the world. We don't need that. We don't need that. Who needed it? His people needed it. Now, they took that statement very seriously because there was a man by the name of Thomas Jefferson who they deemed a prophet because he made a very interesting statement. And he said, I tremble for my country when I think that God is just and his justice cannot sleep forever, that by supernatural intervention, it may be possible a turn of events, right? That could upset the racial apple cart. He said by supernatural intervention. So when you had a black man standing before 600 very proud patriots, celebrating their independence and invoking air, fire, earth, and water on them, how disrespectful. What he was doing then was he was petitioning the Most High, the God of the scriptures that he knew about as a Christian, right? Because that was a very prominent belief system for him, Mother Harriet Tubman, and a lot of folk who were enslaved, that you used these things before to free the Israelites. Now, keep in mind, Mother Harriet Tubman thought she was an Israelite. That's why she completely accepted the title of Moses, unabashedly. He said, now I'm going to put you on the spot because I'm going to petition your elements. The audience understood what he was doing. And what they did after that was they made sure that any black man who ever got to speak again never wrote his own speech. But also what happened was he was issuing a final warning. And remember, the theme, the download that I got was you have everything you need to defeat your enemies for freedom and health. So I was like, oh, this is interesting. Now, check this out. Remember I told you I had written chapter 3, and I was really pleased with what I had written because I had some very powerful insights from Frederick Douglass, as you can see, right? That was powerful. It's not proof positive, right? But as an attorney, it's called circumstantial evidence for a claim that our people strategically wielded the elements of air, fire, earth, and water to secure freedom and health. Now, where does the health part come in? Well, we got to turn to a powerful woman by the name of Harriet Tubman, who was the daughter of Araminta Ross and Ben Ross. And this is a woman who we often think about as the most efficient conductor of the Underground Railroad, rightfully so. She was a master of what she did. But sometimes we overlook the fact that Sarah Bradford, the woman who wrote her biography, who was her confidant and friend, who was the one who explained to us that Mother Harriet Tubman took 19 trips and secured the health and freedom of over 300 people, possibly more. Well, Mother Harriet Tubman confided in Sarah Bradford about something very interesting, that not a single movie, with all of their cinematic leisure and license could do. She told Sarah Bradford something very interesting that connects to this theme of the four elements: air, fire, earth, and water, right? And she said this. She said to Sarah Bradford, Sarah, when I travel at night, I have a navigation system. I see fire in the sky. And it tells me where to go. And she also said that during the daytime, there was a cloud that only she could see that told her where to rest. So are we suggesting that Mother Harriet Tubman had some access to technology? Sarah Bradford wrote it like this. She said, an invisible pillar of cloud by day and fire by night. Well, interestingly enough, she also talked about, and so without money and without friends, she started on through unknown regions, walking by night, hiding by day, but always conscious of an invisible pillar of cloud by day and fire by night, under the guidance of which she journeyed or rested. How many movies have ever depicted Mother Harriet Tubman looking in the sky at a fire? What would we know about Mother Harriet Tubman? She was a deeply religious woman. She was a very prayerful woman. And she would have heard a scripture that referred to the Most High as an all-consuming fire. So that wouldn't have surprised, frightened, or disturbed her. She often told us in her writings that she was always in the presence of God on every journey. Why is it that not a single movie has ever depicted her? I mean, have we not seen movies do some interesting things with the cinematic creativity? Why is it not a prominent feature? Why is it not a prominent feature? Is this one? Okay. Yeah. Why is it not a prominent feature of our cinematic displays of her heroism that there was some kind of technology guiding this sister? I think that's important. Right? I mean, we literally had a movie that come out, and God bless the movie writers, they had the best of intentions, but it showed her taking a series of Uber rides to freedom. And the biggest insult in that movie was that a man who was not of her kind, but who was a friend, allegedly, right? He had the nerve to ask her in the movie, at least, would you like me to ride you over into Philadelphia? That's not in her book. That's not what she said. She said it was the most arduous and hard journey of her life. Why was it necessary for the authors to indicate that she took a series of Uber rides to freedom on her first journey? Why would you depict Mother Harriet on a bridge in the middle of the daytime when the woman clearly said that she hid in the daytime? Why would you show her jumping off of into a river and then just accidentally bumping into freedom when she clearly said she had a navigation system at nighttime? Why is that important? So when I tell you that this book is an ancestrally guided book, you gotta take my word for it, but you gotta read it. So there is a health component also, and Sarah Bradford talked about this, about the fact that Mother Harriet Tubman was a master medicine woman, a doctor even, if you will. And I don't know if you're aware of this, but during the Civil War, Mother Harriet Tubman was confronted, just like every doctor during that time, with a deadly disease. It was called swamp disease. It was something akin to monkeypox today. Oh, the sores were disgusting, oozing out blood, pus, the misery, the agony of the Civil War. People won't even know the beginning of it. It was disgusting. Mother Harriet Tubman, with her brilliance and her encyclopedic knowledge of herbs and plants, she realized something very powerful. They called it swamp disease. So she went down to the swamp and she emerged with some plants. And she took those plants, and I would just imagine in my divine imagination that she starts taking some of them leaves off of that plant and mushing them together with her fingers until it turns into some type of a poultice. And then she starts boiling some of the leaves and making some teas, and she applies it to the wounds. And Sarah Bradford said, she nursed our soldiers in the hospitals and knew how, when they were dying by numbers of some malignant disease, with cunning skill to extract from roots and herbs that grew near the source of the disease, the healing draught, which allayed the fever and restored numbers to health. The nurse, the healer, the medicine woman, the most efficient conductor of the Underground Railroad, has something to tell us about divine self-care. Well, I had written such powerful insights, and I was pulling my research together, and there was another beautiful woman in there, and I'm going to come back to her because she connects to my grandmother. But Frederick Douglass made that petition, issued that final warning. 115 years later, there's a very powerful man by the name of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. It is the night before his assassination. He is in Memphis, Tennessee on a rainy night. Kick the thieves down. Remember the thieves of air, fire, earth, and water. Now, I believe deep in my soul, just like I believe he knew deep in his soul, that his life was measured in minutes at that point. But still, he was looking in the audience at this church, and he was observing the sad, beaten down faces of those people who had gathered there because of the sanitation workers and the oppression and the racism and the murders and the lynchings and the terrorism of this monstrous enemy that operated under the auspices of the individuals with the protection of government. And he was looking at these people, and as sad as he was in his heart, he couldn't take the time to think about his wife and his children because he had the people who relied on him at that moment. And he decided to sprinkle some joy with that rain and some encouragement. But he dropped a jewel on us, family, right now. And this is what he said was so interesting. Dr. King talked about the fact that Bull Connor, you know who Bull Connor is, right? This was the man who Dr. King was referring to when he was talking about what happened on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Right? We just celebrated that. Some folks went to the Edmund Pettus Bridge to reenact that moment. That was a brutal moment in history, but it was a powerful moment. And when people looked at that around the world, they were devastated by the hypocrisy of the U.S. Constitution versus the U.S. behavior towards these people. And a lot of us mistake the civil rights movement for being without weaponry, just because it was non-violent. But I have a different position, and I want to share it with you. But you got to listen real carefully. Promise to listen carefully to what I'm about to say. Because Dr. King said this on the night before his assassination. I want you to listen for a new word. I want you to listen for the 4 elements. And if you hear it, raise your hand. Bull Connor next would say, turn the fire hoses on him. And as I said to you the other night, Bull Connor didn't know history. He knew a kind of physics that somehow didn't relate to the trans physics that we knew about. I said, raise your hand if you hear a new word. And that was the fact that there's a certain kind of fire that no water could put out. And we went before the fire hoses. We had known water. If we were Baptist or some other denomination, we had been immersed. If we were Methodist or some other, we had been sprinkled, but we knew water. That couldn't stop us. And we just went on before the dogs, and we would look at them. And we would go on before the water hoses, and we would look at it. And we'd just go on singing, just over my head, I see freedom in the air. Did y'all hear it? The new word. Transphysics. Not physics, not metaphysics. Transphysics. What does trans mean? To go beyond and across. What is physics? the most basic and simple definition is the study of the elements, right? It's a more complicated definition, and we can go over that. But at its core, people understood that physics is a study of the natural world. To go beyond the natural world, he said something about fire. What did he say? There's a certain kind of fire that no water could put out. Have you all ever seen a fire that no water could put out? Well, what is he referring to? We're going to fix that. But he also mentioned the fact that we knew water. And that Bull Connor knew a kind of physics that didn't relate to the trans physics that we knew about. Did he say miracle? Did he say divine intervention? Did he say biblical episode? He said trans physics. He was describing a science that we knew that went beyond the kind of basic science of physics that Bull Connor seemed to know. Now, what is the first law of physics, family? Where my Howard students at? An object at rest will stay at rest until the external force moves it from its place. What was the object at rest? The civil rights protesters. Bull Connor knew that an external force could potentially move the object at rest. The civil rights protesters standing on their moral supremacy firmly planted. He knew he needed something powerful to knock those protesters off of their stance of moral supremacy. He said, oh, I got something for you. All right, boys, turn the fire hoses on. And as I said to you the other night, Bull Connor didn't know history. What history didn't Bull Connor know? His people wrote the history books. Dr. King, what are you talking about? Remember Frederick Douglass? It is not the light we need, but the fire. It is not the gentle shower, right? Yeah. A fire by night and a pillar of cloud by day. Who was looking in the sky for freedom in the air? Yeah. Didn't Mother Harriet Tubman tell you she had a navigation system that was looking for her like a cloud during the daytime that only she could see? And a fire at night? We know that there's no fires in the sky at night. What was she describing? What kind of intelligence moves in the sky in a directional mechanism way that helps someone get from Maryland to New York, from Maryland to Virginia, from maybe even Virginia or Baltimore to Canada? I'm excited, are y'all? Because the people who don't have access to nuclear weapons and don't have access to machine guns, and every time you turn around, it's unarmed black man, as if it's wrong to have arms, right? In a country where the Constitution says that it is your right and duty in many instances to carry arms. Do you feel a little bit of encouragement that we might have access to something called trans physics that we can still tap into through the elements of air, fire, earth, and water to secure freedom and health? And if you think that Dr. Martin Luther King was just mincing his words, let me assure you that he wasn't. Because later on in that same speech, the king said something very interesting, just in case you missed the point. And there was a power there that Bull Connor couldn't adjust to. So we ended up transforming Bull into a steer, and we won our struggle in Birmingham. Did you hear that, family? That man said we turned a bull into a steer. You know what a bull is? It is the most masculine and big, angry animal you can find. How did you turn a bull into a steer, Dr. King? What is a steer? It is an animal that cannot reproduce itself. It is impotent. Dr. King spiritually castrated that man with something that he referred to as trans physics. And because he knew history and Bull Connor didn't know history, he was tapping into something that Frederick Douglass was tapping into when he declared war on the United States of America. Can we revise our history, family? Because there's a connection between freedom and health and the four elements plus one. See, what makes trans physics is the fifth element called divine intention. And that is why you need this book, because the 5th chapter breaks down divine intention versus wicked intention. You don't have to be a master scientist to access transphysics. You don't have to be a nuclear physicist to access transphysics. You don't have to be a Christian, a Muslim, a Jew, an Israelite. You have to have divine intention. And if you have divine intention, and there is nothing more divine than freedom and health and helping a downtrodden people secure it, that divine intention coupled with the power of the elements that we saw manifested in the speech. Do you know, within 7 years of Frederick Douglass, the Honorable One, declaring, it is not the light we need, but the fire. It is not the gentle shower, but the thunder. We need the storm, the whirlwind, and the earthquake. We got an EMP. And you know what an EMP is? Within 7 years of that divine declaration of war. An EMP, family, is something you need to be concerned about right now. It is called an electromagnetic pulse. It happened in 1859. 7 years. 7 is the year of completion. Do you know that was a next day mail service in the time of the divine? The sun issues off a flare, an electrogeomagnetic storm, and it sends off a solar flare that comes to the United States of America and all around the world. 7 years, that is next day mail service that he invoked on July the 5th, 1852. Do the math, family. And then within 3 years after that, we get the Civil War. I think we have a superhero on our hands. Ashe, can we give some respect on the name Frederick Douglass? Our ancestors were speaking a secret language that sounded like English. It's in the Negro spirituals. It's in the biographies. It's in the poems. There was another great ancestor. You know him from the organization that he established and brought to the United States in March of 1917, the Jamaican man who transformed the world with a global African what's the word I'm looking for? Diagram, position, something, I'm looking for the word, where's it coming from? I got so many words in my head. He's shifted our thinking in such a way that he created something called the Universal Negro Improvement Association. And he too had a little something to say to us about transphysics. But you gotta listen carefully for it. I'm gonna share it with you really briefly. He was in prison, in Tubes. He had been wrongfully indicted. He had been wrongfully prosecuted and wrongfully sentenced to prison time for mail fraud, right? He's in prison. It's 1925. And he makes an interesting statement that I think will resonate with you after hearing about transphysics. If death has power, then count on me and death to be the real Marcus Garvey I would like to be. If I may come in an earthquake, or a cyclone, or a plague, or pestilence, or as God would have me, then be assured that I shall never desert you or make your enemies triumph over you. Look for me in the whirlwind or the storm. Look for me all around you, for with God's grace, I shall come and bring with me countless millions of black slaves who have died in America and the West Indies and the millions in Africa to aid you in your fight for liberty, freedom, and life. Life is health, freedom, and health. Do you hear the ancestors? Booker T. Washington had something to say about the transphysical knowledge that Paul Connor didn't know anything about. I pity the man or woman who has never learned to enjoy nature and to get strength and inspiration. Mother Harriet Jacobs, my sister Frank, we are sisters in Mother Harriet Jacobs, the first enslaved woman to write her own biography. She said, I never realized what grand things air and fire are till I had been deprived of them. Air and sun, right? And she goes on and describes something very, very interesting about health. She talked about the fact that when enslaved people took the arduous journey towards freedom in defiance of the U.S. laws that said that they were bound to slavery for the rest of their lives, unless manumitted, right? In summer, the most terrible thunderstorms were acceptable, for the rain came through the roof, and I rolled up my bed as it might cool the hot boards under it. Later in the season, storms sometimes wet my clothes through and through, and this was not comfortable when the air grew chilly with oakum. Why was she talking about this? Well, this is a sister who waged psychological warfare on the man who claimed her body, mind, and soul. A man named Dr. Morgan. She went and escaped and hid on his own plantation, sent that man all across the United States looking for her, and she was right there under his nose. But the price she paid for that freedom was so deadly to her body. She talked about the fact that, but for weeks I was tormented by hundreds of little red insects, fine as needle points, that pierced through my skin and produced an intolerable burning. The good grandmother gave me herb, teas, and cooking medicines, and finally I got rid of them. She spent 7 years in the attic of her grandmother's house. You know what slave houses allegedly look like? The freed people, their houses weren't that much better. She stayed in a room above the house that was about the size of that table to where you are right here for 7 years. You talk about freedom and health, the misery. Well, she's not the only ancestor that refers indirectly or directly to trans physics. Now, this one threw me by surprise because I'll be honest with you, y'all almost didn't get these jokes. Because when I got that download, and then I looked at I got a little modest library in my room, and there's something that looked like this shelf right here. And I said, oh my God, you're asking me to go through these books and try to find the word air, fire, earth, and water? I think not. And so I started procrastinating. I procrastinated for a while because I was just mortified by the idea of trying to prove it by looking for the word air, fire, earth, and water through hundreds of pages of books. And so my ego was in the way until one night I woke up around 3 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning, to a sound of a very sobering instruction, advisement, maybe even warning. And it said, you procrastinate because you think you have time. Okay? Well, I got up on that bed and I said, lesson learned. Because not that I was terrified of death. That didn't bother me. What terrified me was what Dr. Miles referred to as the richest place in the world. Why? Because so many of us die and leave the planet without fulfilling our divine purpose, without leaving the wisdom for the next generation. So that motivated me dearly to write and write and write. And I did not stop writing until I had produced the first draft of this book. And so when I say to you, I became an 86-year-old grandmother so that I could write this book, because I write it in the voice of a grandmother talking to her future descendants, because there were some things that had happened to me as a child and as a teenager that terrified me to my core would happen to great-great-great-grandchildren. That if I didn't take the time to explain to them about how people can show up in your life with what appears to be good intentions, because of what they're saying to you, but not revealing the secrets of their heart, which will only manifest through time and through the consequences of their behaviors. That's why I wrote chapter 5 of this book. This book is not just for women. This book is for fathers, for brothers, for kings who have daughters. This is for husbands, for brothers, for anyone who has to engage with women in their lives, who care about womanhood and women, who care about the dignity of being a race that once aspired at least to be called children of the Most High. Okay? So this book is ancestral. And I spent all this time talking about the African origins of wellness, the fact that we have to Africanize our bodies by teaching our daughters and sons African terms to describe their body. In other words, we've got 1,000+ African languages. Can we use at least one of them to describe the woman's womb or the vaginal area? So I went on a sojourn that took me in Whole Foods and in and out of African shops and anybody. I was in cabs asking inappropriate questions of brothers and sisters. Can you tell me what the sisters call their vagina in your language? I mean, like all kinds of embarrassing situations, but I needed to know. And it was smart because there was a good sister friend of mine, her name is Anisha Muhammad, and she kept trying to convince me that I needed to get into this business of vaginal steaming. And I wasn't really excited about it because everything that I had seen about it indicated that it was no disrespect, it was from another culture. You know, it was, and I don't like borrowing other people's cultures so much. Not that, don't get me wrong, I love all races and I love all cultures. Like, I have mad respect for everybody. Everybody has a place. But when it came to spirituality and medicine and wellness, I kept thinking about my grandmother and how my great-grandmother cured her of what we know today as tetanus using copper pennies and using vinegar and salted pork fat. Did our people know something about medicine? My grandmother was about 8 or 9 years old and she stepped, much to her misfortune, on a rusted nail. And that thing went straight through her tennis shoe. And until that day, she had never bought me a pair of tennis shoes. You gotta understand why our parents and grandparents did certain things. She would never buy me tennis shoes. And then they'd tell me why. But I figured it out. And so everybody was afraid because this is the 1920s in Atlanta, Georgia, which looked much like a rural town in South Africa during apartheid. The way my dad described the way his grandmother lived. You would never imagine Atlanta looking like that. So she couldn't jump in the Bronco and head over to the nearest hospital and have the doctor treat tetanus. She had to look around the house. And what she saw was some salted pork fat, a couple of pennies on the floor in the corner, and something within that woman drew on something that Mother Harriet Jacobs and the medicine woman of her time drew on, which was Mother Harriet Jacobs when she initially escaped from Dr. Norgram's possession. She went to another enslaved woman's house to hide and almost got caught, ran into the bushes at nighttime and encountered a reptile that wrapped itself around her leg while she's trying to hide from slave catchers. What luck! And it bit her so excruciating, she knew it was a poisonous bite. And so it was so painful and deadly that she almost risked her life getting exposed to the slave catchers because she couldn't deal with that pain on her foot. Could that have been even that painful experience divine? Because what happened next was very interesting and it's relevant to this issue of transphysics. And would I be able to clearly articulate just how brilliant and medicinal our ancestors were if this hadn't happened to her today? And connected to what happened to my grandmother over 120 years later? Well, they got smart. First thing she did was she said to her enslaved friend, get some ash out the fireplace and let's apply it to the wound so we can try to get the swelling down. And it helped because ash was a resource that was available in abundance. People were burning stuff to stay hot, to cook, right? Using what's available in your resources, what's in your environment. Well, interestingly enough, they realized that wasn't going to address the poison as adequately as it should. So they decided to go to the enslaved woman without telling the enslaved woman what was going on. And they said, oh, Mama, if somebody's just so happened to get bitten by a snake, what would you recommend? Oh, I want you to get yourself some carrots and soak them in vinegar and apply the ash to the wound. That's what the enslaved woman told her to do. Interestingly enough, it seemed to have worked because Mother Harriet Jacobs didn't die from the poison ivy. Interesting. Vinegar Coppers? Powder? Okay. Well, remember I told you my grandmother, 8, 9 years old, running around, steps on a nail. This is a common disease, poison, snake bites, and stepping on rusted nails, playing around in the fields. Well, her grandmother, my great-great-grandmother Rebecca, I don't even know her last name. She went and got some salted pork fat, because that was what was available, right? Poor people in the South. Some pennies, and I could not remember for the life of me what was the solution, what was the liquid that my great-grandmother, my grandmother was telling me that her great-grandmother used, because I was being inundated with these stories and I didn't realize that I was being fed medicine in the form of oral tradition. And so my grandmother told me about this remedy, and she said, Sheila, when my grandmother took that thing off my foot, it was black and blue. So she took the salted pork fat, applied it to the bottom of the wound after they took the nail out, and put a penny underneath it. And something happened. It extracted the poison. Well, do you know what happens when you soak a penny in vinegar? Because I was concerned that y'all were going to make a mockery out of me and say that I'm engaging in silliness, right? So I said, well, the least I could do is just soak a penny in some vinegar and I just have some kind of a plan. Okay, so I had some apple cider vinegar and I had some white vinegar, and fortunately enough, times weren't so bad that I couldn't find 2 pennies. So I put one of the pennies in white vinegar and one in apple cider vinegar, and 6 hours later, I was devastated. I was like, oh, I can't publish this book. There they go, people will laugh at me, I'm gonna look like a fool. So I went to bed and I was devastated. Nothing happened. And I woke up the next day. And much to my amazement and my astonishment, the penny that had been put in white vinegar had a green powder on it. And I got on that Google, and I was like, oh my God, Google. And I started Googling penny vinegar and all that stuff. And believe it or not, Dr. Google responded with an answer. Do you know that when a penny is soaked in vinegar, it forms a substance called malachite? A green powdery substance. Now, I'm not making any medical or scientific claims, but I am telling you that the ancestors were onto something. And guess what's interesting? Snake bites were so common. Our ancestors weren't using the words acidic and alkaline, but essentially what happens with a poison bite and with tetanus is that the blood becomes more acidic. Can we get some Dr. Sadie in the house? And they knew, they had sense enough to know that they needed to invoke a substance that triggered a more alkaline balance. Have you ever seen a battery explode? What do we call batteries? Alkaline, right? Yeah. There's a powder that comes out of it, right? Mm-hmm. A powder, and batteries are surrounded in what? Copper, right? Are we onto something here? Did the ancestors know something that we just lost to time? But not completely, because how did my grandmother know to get some pennies and soak them in something? I would imagine it was vinegar. Isn't that incredible? An enslaved woman who never talked to my great-great-grandmother over 100 years later. Why don't we know this? Can we get some research from the scientists on the power of copper, malachite perhaps, and the ability to remove acidic substances from the blood? Are y'all following me that there was a history that Volcano couldn't relate to, a physics, right? A trans physics, a science that we had knowledge of, right? So, when I'm telling you that I took a great deal of time trying to lay the foundation all the way back to ancient Ethiopia, where the women of Wolo were engaging in a practice known as regaling, smoking the womb with a certain wood. When a woman's cycle finished, it was a cleansing process. When a woman wants to have a baby, she goes through regaling. It is a self-care process that engages the womb, the head, and the feet. Why the head? Well, they would take the butter and apply the butter, and while the smoke is smothering and sweating, The butter melts down and cleanses the pores, saturates the eyes, the ears, and the mouth. My grandmother was absolutely obsessed with three things: my feet, my womb, and my head. She was always digging in my ears, always scraping around my nose, telling me to wash my mouth, rinse my mouth, deeply concerned about my eyesight. Right? The sisters in Ethiopia, the women, the legendary women of Wolo, were doing somehow, my grandmother never met an Ethiopian woman, emphasizing the same body parts. This is what I refer to as total body alignment. Total body alignment is rooted in the ancient mystic science of transphysics that Dr. King referred to, that the Honorable Frederick Douglass drew on. It is the connection between freedom and health, meaning that as women, as divine vehicles, as the creative aspect of the universe, we have a divine purpose. And in order for us to fulfill our purpose, we need access to a fully functional crown as a part of our sacred temple. We need the access to the divine resources of creativity through our sacred womb or thrones. You sit on a throne, right? Literally. Your husband mounts a throne, if you will, right? To create that spark. And your feet are the pedestal. So what I'm introducing our babies to is a new language that is rooted in old knowledge, the sacred temple. When I say we are a temple, what is a temple without a royal crown? And the crown isn't just the hair, ladies, it's the entire head. The eyes for divine vision, just like physical eyesight. The ears for divine listening, just like physical hearing. Do you know that you hear danger long before you see it? So it is so important for our babies to know how to listen to what is not stated. And what I've been telling my son, who's in the audience now, God bless my son, when someone says something to you, there has already been a conversation that took place before you were invited to it. It is the thought that is not stated. If you are in tune with divine hearing, it will serve as a management emergency alert system. You ever be in a situation where you might have purchased a ticket to go to another country, and on the day of the trip, something says, don't go. And you either obey or you don't. Some people have lost their lives because they don't listen to that first voice. But that is requiring divine listening. So we need to have a system that not only addresses the physical aspects of healing the eyes, cleansing the ears, cleansing the mouth, but through prayer and setting our divine intention, the fifth element, we invoke the spiritual cleanse as well. The womb represents divine creativity. We as women do not need men to invoke our divine creativity. We are endowed with that through the Creator. We can give birth to business ideas, to inventions, to poetry, to song. We are natural birthers. It is a part of our divine right. So to be centered in divine creativity and to be rooted or grounded in reality, that is total body alignment to me. Being elevated in your head, always observing the divine, getting the divine downloads, because you have divine vision, divine hearing, and divine speech. You use your words to elevate a people, to elevate and to speak life into situations, to invoke the divine over your enemies, even Honorable Frederick Douglass. Do y'all know Nat Turner said, it would then reveal to me the knowledge of the elements, the revolution of the planets, the changes of tides, and the changes of seasons. That was Nat Turner. He said it would then reveal to me the knowledge of the elements. And he was talking to Thomas Gray, the man who interviewed him after he turned himself in. The book is loaded with wisdom, understanding, and insights.
Come on, I'm just like, you happy? Man, I've been transformed just sitting here. Like, just the way that you carry the spirit through your words, through the book, through your voice changes, through like, it's
It's
clear.
personal.
Yeah, it's real personal. And that's the best kind of message, because if you don't believe in it that fervently, then who's gonna buy into it?
Yes.
Who's gonna
I am
want
on
to
a
even
mission to
listen
transform
to
the way our daughters and sons speak about their bodies. I have a chapter in there called Dinkish, and it's about the girl that I wished I had the opportunity to be. The girl who I wish had at 8 years old when I got my cycle, had been ushered into womanhood in the way that this loving mother and grandmother bring her Dinkish, which is a name from the women of Wogo. And she's about 9, 10, 12 years old, somewhere there, and she's wearing a beautiful white camise. And all of a sudden it gets stained red, and she doesn't know why. And she's terrified of what her mother is going to say. But when she shows her mother the stain and points to it, her mother smiles and ushers her into womanhood softly, graciously, lovingly. And her that is built for women to do their sacred divine self-care, the regaling. And she shows her how to anoint her head with the butter, right? And brings in the adis, which is the combination of lavender and butter, and just gives her this beautiful ritual of cleansing and healing with air, fire, earth, and water. So I brought my products to show you because they're in chapter 9 of the book. So after we go through all that history, we go and talk about how to do and how to use air, fire, earth, and water. Because the vaginal steaming mechanism, which is similar to the vaginal smoking of the Ethiopian women, invokes all 4 of the elements. You have water, right, which facilitates air or steam. The steam is created by the fire. And then you have the earth, which is the herbs. So when you are over here and you get to see the system, and I hand make these thrones. I make these thrones myself. And I blend, I have 4 herbal blends. And then I have a soap that represents.
You know, there's this book called Black Women Will Save the World. And I was just watching this.
So thank you for that. Thank you. And I know we're straight.
You are. This is comprehensive. It is total body alignment.
Everything in the whole thing right here.
Right.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you, everyone online. Our device is gonna go out soon, so we wanted to wrap up for the folks online. But thank you, Sheila, for this amazing talk about your book. Like I need to read this book like yesterday.
Yes.
Everyone, you can purchase the book online. We do have a few copies in the store as well. Please get your life. Goodness.
And hopefully my dream is that you'll be able to find this book on the St. Coco bookshelf anytime.
Absolutely. Anytime. Anytime. Thank y'all.
And so, yes, absolutely. And can I share my contact information? So I have a website. It's called queendomcare.com. And you spell care with a Q, just like you spell care with a Q in Divine SelfQare Strategy. So it's QUEENDONQARE.com, and that's where you can learn more about my book, learn more about my work, where I'll be doing speaking engagements and prayerfully more book signings, and hopefully I get to come back one day and do it again, and have some students from Howard or whatever they bless me with. I would be more than honored. But thank you so much for your time. My number is 202-952-6123, and you can also email me at info@SheilaBrownSpeaks.com. If you know Baba Yao, because he is the Afro-Cuban plumber, you know how to reach me. Baba Yao, thank you so much, beloved, for all your work. This could not be possible without you. And thank you, Sankofa. Thank you, Baba Harema, Holly Jarema, and Mama Shrikiana, for facilitating the youth and having this story and allowing new authors like me to get my voice heard and share my journey. So thank you so much, beloved. And I have Crown Care. And one more thing. Howard University, ironically, has filed a patent on my crown care steam station, and I don't know if you guys can see it, but this is a new invention, so I'm officially an inventor now. And Howard was prioritizing inventions that were helping with COVID and therapies, and I created this to help facilitate upper respiratory cleanses.
Wow.
So imagine what the throne care steam station does for the vagina. This does for the upper respiratory system, and for beauty, for facial steams. Again, using the same elements of air, fire, earth, and water. And so the eye work, or the crown care station, comes with an eye mask to facilitate an eye cleanse using, believe it or not, a hot potato. So when I tell you the ancestors were working with me on this beautiful work of healing and medicine, using things naturally, ear candling to help remove, that's an ancient science that you find in Africa and Asia and even here in the shores of the US among indigenous people. And they used, again, air, fire, earth, and water through creating a vacuum in a candle that is made out of pure cotton or some other substance, natural. And it literally, you light the end of the fire at one end, and it requires two people. If you can look at it right there, I can show you if you hand it to me. And it's a remedy for removing wax. Yep, that's it. Wax, debris, yeast, and things like that out of your ear. And it's also believed by many indigenous cultures that men, in fact, would use this in Native American, and we know many of them to be indigenous Africans or indigenous Black people as well. And they would use ear candling as a spiritual cleanse before they did anything major or anything like that, because it extracted a negative energy out of the body. And so other cultures had very similar paradigms. That was the word I was looking for. I was saying diet, but paradigms as well that related to the physical aspects of the body having spiritual implications as well. And that's what divine self-care is. So when you do your oral cleanse by taking the pure coconut, organic coconut oil from my bottle right here for oral cleanses, or what I call oral essence cooling oil, you recite a prayer. I wash my mouth to remove impurities so that I may come before you most high with a clean body and a pure spirit, so that the words that I speak will be edified and provide liberation and freedom for your people. I cleanse my womb through vaginal steaming to remove impurities so that I may be centered in divine creativity to fulfill my purpose. I wash my feet with the throne, with a pedestal station to remove impurities so that I will be grounded in reality and walk my walk on the divine purpose of my life. See, that's the fifth element. Everything in the book interconnects. Thank you, Dr. King, for transphysics, for giving a name to something our people always knew and always did. It is, regardless, it transcends religion. It is a spiritual principle rooted in divine principle of divine intent.